This computer. Okay, so it's recording now. Excuse me. And I can edit out whatever beginning stuff.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can get started. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Maya Boljetta. I am a RISD student and I work with design and health, and I'm a filmmaker, activist, and this is the Indoor Air Advocates and Christian. And you can introduce yourselves and yeah, and a little bit about what you do.
Okay. Paper, rock, scissors on who goes first.
Oh, what?
You can.
Um, I'll do a quick intro rather, because I think my story kind of, for me, of course, blends into how I met Kristian. But my name is Michael Bailey. I'm a co-founder of Indoor Air Care Advocates, and I'm just a dad and a malware reverse engineer who was paying a lot of attention to the articles that were flying by in 2020 and later, and I really triggered on or rather seized on the fact that HEPA filters and ventilation have made a big difference. And it also impressed me that the recommendations that have come out recently due to the pandemic are born from airborne isolation protocols, basically. And we just find that we need to raise the bar to airborne illness. Otherwise, it's going to have us, not as productive as we were, not as much in attendance. So I've just been reaching out to hundreds of parents, literally in about 40 states altogether, and trying to connect with parents so they can all understand what the expert recommendations are and talk to their schools and get information for themselves, as well as see what other schools are doing. So through that work, I found out about Kristian, who's doing amazing work in, I believe, Baltimore, right?
Yep.
You want to tell us about that? I think
So
that's
yeah,
really cool.
my name's Christian. I am not an expert. I am just a mom who went to school for electrical engineering, and I had the immense privilege of being able to Google and also knowing how to solve for X in an equation. I primarily understand HEPA filters and indoor air quality because of my passion for advocating for equity and trying to fix some of the health disparities that exist in my community. My zone school had a need. And so slogging through spec sheets for manufacturers and building code and just being really, really, really annoying to local government officials and other parents, that's been my offering to the space. And so that's how I found Michael as well.
Another service we provide. I'm also not an expert, by the way, in air quality or anything. I read a lot, and I also have an engineering degree. So that was kind of, we have the same background of like, well, let's dig in and focus on solutions.
Excellent. Awesome. So this talk basically will get down to the bottom of how much air filters can kill, which is a huge amount. And there's airborne pathogens, they kill them, and how these filters can basically end pandemics and future infections, like future airborne diseases, infectious ones. And so basically, yeah, we're going to talk about how, better design is needed from the product level to systems level and, how we can all help. So yeah, let's get started with the questions. So let's see, we did question one. Um, let's see. Overview of what okay. So yeah, maybe I can also ask Michael, yeah, what have you done, your organization, the Indoor Air Advocates, what have you done previously and your goal for the organization moving forward?
Yeah, so far, what we've done is kind of consolidate the recommendations that we know of. We've ranked them for purposes of advocacy in terms of which ones appear to be the most widely recommended, because then we'll have the most support with the most experts in our corner, and which ones appear to be the most aggressive. And the most widely recommended has been 6 to 12 air changes per hour. And the reason why is, like I said, the airborne isolation protocols that exist, and also the healthcare air quality standards, such as ASHRAE Standard 170, all say to get 6 to 12 air changes or more in some spaces. So I think that's pretty solid if that's used for airborne isolation, and it's what the experts are recommending, and there are many experts recommending it. Just one of the big jobs is figuring out what the main thing is to stand behind. A lot of facilities people don't like air changes per hour, so another recommendation that I know is up there in terms of its aggressiveness is that of Dr. Joseph Allen at the T.H. Chan School of Public Health at Harvard, and his recommendation is 30 CFM per person.
Excellent. Awesome. And what do you feel like your goal is in terms of for the near future for the organization, what you're looking to kind of try to go in the direction of?
I want parents to understand what we should be expecting for our children. I want adults, right, to know what we should be expecting in our workspaces, public buildings. I want everybody to know that we're all owed this diligence for people who own buildings to familiarize themselves with the requirements and attempt to adopt them. And I also want people to be demanding quantitative answers to how much ventilation and filtration they're getting. I also want people to understand that HEPA filtration and ventilation are the main recommended solutions. There are other things that are recommended, but of the recommended solutions, these are the ones that there's the most literature on, they're the most applicable and or affordable. And so, I want people to just be aware of that and to make the facilities owners aware of that and to be asking for it so that we all basically live happier, healthier, more productive lives.
Cool. So it sounds like there definitely needs to be a lot more communication just in general and just conversations around it and people just kind of getting more informed in general.
Yeah, I feel like it's really nuanced. It can be difficult, but yeah, I think Google helps.
Google helps. Yeah, Google helps a little bit
Oh my
for sure.
gosh, mind blowing. I'm just realizing that's a shameless plug for my employer. We got acquired. So
Nice.
I don't speak for my employers.
Okay, that's good. All right, so in terms of the Corsi Rosenthal box, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I would love to hear a brief and general overview of how it's made, the time it takes to make one and its general like effectiveness.
People have gotten it down to about 45 minutes. And I'll jump in on this one, right? Because I think, Kristian, you were saying this one's not as familiar, right? I think we went on mute. But yeah, basically it can take 30 to 45 minutes if you're like banging them out. But you slap 4 filters together in a cube with something like cardboard underneath, put a box fan on top, and create a shroud so that the box fan doesn't pull air from right in front of it, and so that it pulls all the air from the filters. And the deal is these filters aren't HEPA filters, so they're not going to catch 99.97% of those bad particles. But if you're using a box fan to move that much air through that many filters, it ends up that you can move enough air through that the clean air delivery rate is equivalent to or better than HEPA filters, according to studies that I have seen. So I'm not real familiar with CR boxes, but from what I can tell, the Center for Green Schools says that that they work. Other authorities like I hesitate to name them because I don't want to misspeak, but other authorities appear to be putting them forward as an alternative solution. So yeah, I think they're great. They're a great DIY way to get air quality. They're like maybe an eighth as much in cost or a quarter as much in cost as a HEPA filter, and they can clean air pretty quietly too. That's a big deal in classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, if time and research was invested in that kind of thing, that can be the key to distribution in terms of wider and less expensive distribution, like the way masks and vaccines are all part of the equation with the pandemic. I feel like, air filters that are inexpensive, we definitely want to keep getting those out too, for sure.
Yeah.
Find new ways. So in terms of discussing, like maybe we can discuss about air carbon measurements and what your findings are with them.
Yeah. And I just want to balance things out. So I wonder if we can, I wonder if Kristian can self-nominate something to talk about maybe in a moment, but I will
Sure.
address that question. You're talking about carbon like CO2 measurements and the findings.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
because
I've got
that's
a
the way
kind
you measure the particle amount in the air, correct? Like for those who are watching who may not be in the science field.
I'll share how it works from again layperson's perspective, having read a lot. But first off, not an expert. I've just read what the experts are saying,
Yes.
and the widest overlap that I've found in recommendations is that 6 to 12 air changes I talked about, which is it's not conducive to measurement with CO2. But I want to address it real quick. Air changes per hour represent an airflow rate relative to the size of the room that you're in. So imagine you took a whole room full of air and then you froze it like an ice cube and you swiped left, and then new air. That's an air change, 1 air change. So air change rates indicate how many times per hour you're swiping left on that stale air. In real life, the air actually mixes, and so it's not as perfect as all that. But if you're getting about 6 air changes per hour, which is the bottom of that 6 to 12 air change range that's recommended by various experts, at least 2 studies associate that with an 82.5% reduction in either exposure or transmission. So that's what we stand behind advocating for. But with a CO2 monitor, which I should have brought one. Actually, I could really quickly run and get
Yeah,
one.
go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna do it. I'll be
That'll be
right
really
back.
fascinating. Yeah, no, totally.
So yeah, I don't have we originally planned to when it's myself and one other parent who are working to use air quality as one of our ways to mitigate risk in the school. So one of the things that we started thinking about from the beginning was crowdfunding or doing some fundraisers for CO2 monitors because we know
Okay.
that if we can measure that's a good metric to be able to, I wanted to do like the delta, right? So my focus was if you have students in a classroom and we're really focusing on an idea of community and having everybody playing a role in how and cleaning our air ourselves. Like one of the best ways it could be a really good science experiment for kids is literally, okay, well, when we are all in this space, what does the reading say? When we are not in this space, what does the reading say when we open the windows? Because like I said, everything, my approach has always been like community, and no matter like what age you are, you have an offering to the space. And so starting kids out early and understanding like this is what you can do. You can say to the teacher, hey, like, look, like we probably should open a window, or is the filter on, or there's a lot of things that are like real life applications of it, but I haven't really gotten into the science of it. And also we need to do some more fundraising to be able to put them into classrooms in my district.
So you're saying that all of the different factors in a room can adjust how much COVID, how much COVID is in the air and get versus getting removed by a filter. So like with the windows open or, other factors maybe. Yeah, that's something that I feel like would be really valuable to get like if they invest research into getting like solid numbers, solid stats, solid like when this happens, this is what happened. Like how we say, okay, masks are 99.9% effective in keeping COVID out if it's a K95, a KN95. So it's like the same kind of thing. It's like we need to, get these numbers clear instead of, so I feel like that's for sure a very important topic to keep discussing, just the measurements of just what affects what, which is where Michael your estimations of the air carbon measurements and your findings on that comes in, that helps measure the amount of COVID in the air, correct?
I would say it doesn't measure the amount of COVID in the
Or
air
the
because
amount of like the filters.
not even filters. This is interesting. So just so that everybody knows, HEPA filters, they filter particulates, but they can't filter a gas like CO2. So if
Okay.
we're breathing and filling up if we like started doing jumping jacks right now all in the same room, and maybe this number on my CO2 monitor went from 683 to like, I don't know, 2000, or now it's 667. But if it started climbing and we turned on a filter, my understanding from what the experts have said is that it wouldn't affect that, but it would affect particles, and particulates, and droplet nuclei that are floating around in the air. It catches those at a certain efficiency. In the case of a HEPA filter, it's 99.97% efficiency. And so of the air that passes through that filter, almost everything that's a COVID-bearing particle, based on what I understand, is going to get captured in that filter. Now, do the molecules in that corner of the room go line up in a queue behind the filter to go get filtered? No. Air mixes, and so you can't rely on that. And that's why we advocate usually for multiple HEPA filters in a given room, operating at levels that are tolerable from a noise perspective, but that conform to the 6 to 12 air changes.
So
But
how many air filters in a room would you say your findings are that are effective?
I don't have an expert recommendation per se, but the recommendations have been to the effect that if you have one, it doesn't create a uniform risk reduction, because you'd have to be nearer to that filter for that filter to have an equal chance of eating one of those particles as your nostril. So I advocate, this is why I advocate. It's not an expert recommendation, but I advocate 2 to 3 at least. And I think that's hard enough to advocate for. So
Yeah.
that's where we
What are the
begin.
prices of like a HEPA filter that works well? What's the average price range of
They
that?
can be between $80 and the most expensive ones that I know of are like $1,000. But most of the filters that are above several $100s are, I don't want to disparage any brands or
Yeah.
get sued, but I would just say that I don't see any reason to buy a filter that costs more than a few $100s. And the way that you measure whether it's a filter you want is by the clean air delivery rate, the CADR. And you just make sure that that clean air delivery rate is going to contribute to the right air change rate in your room. And there's actually some algebra for that. It's like basically, if you wanted 6 air changes, you need enough CFM to equal the square footage times the ceiling height divided by 10.
That's really good to know. That should be on like some kind of landing page because that's the kind of stuff that's like that's really good. So in terms of air changes, so of course the more changes per hour, the faster it gets rid of any potential COVID in the air, correct?
Yeah, so there were studies that kind of substantiate this. There's CDC found that 5 air changes gets you 65% reduction in the inhaled dose. CERN in Switzerland found that the same number of air changes, 5 air changes, got a different number. So their finding was varied a little bit, 72 to 75% depending on the season. So between 65 and 75% at 5 air changes. At 6 air changes, the Hume Foundation found that mechanical ventilation, which is different than HEPA filtration, it's actually fresh air, that reduces transmission by 82.5%. And Gaith University at 6 air changes per hour, which is it was really 5.7 air changes, so a little shy of that, got you an 82.5% reduction in the inhaled dose. So it's kind of a curve that goes probably asymptotically like this.
Mhm.
And there's a pre-pub out there that says 95% reduction can be had with 12 air changes.
So to get more air changes, also that would be the purpose of getting, say, 3 air filters, 3 HEPAs, because if there's 3 HEPAs and they're each doing 5 air changes, that'd be like 15 air changes an hour. Is that right?
Yeah, the usual for classrooms, for instance, would be that like 1 HEPA filter might be able to get, at a tolerable noise level, might be usually able to get, I don't know, just for example, maybe 2 or 3 air changes or something like that. And to get the actual 6 you're looking for, or 8 or 12, you want there to be enough to have have the adequate clean air delivery rate, but also not be screaming, not be really loud. So you have to turn the fan speed down and have several of them usually.
So this is interesting. With 3 air filters, almost 100% of the particles can disappear in the air. Is that correct? Per hour?
Well, so I think there are a lot of caveats to that.
Hmm.
Um, Basically, the way it works is that the far field transmission can be reduced by numbers that are like that. And the actual realized reduction in risk will vary per scenario. And there's a lot that a non-expert, wouldn't be able to account for in that.
Mhm.
But what I know is that if you do increase the reduction of risk for far field transmission, then things like masks are immensely more effective. CDC found that it goes from 65% reduction to 90% reduction by adding a mask on everybody.
An N95 mask or just any mask?
They didn't indicate. And I also want to clarify that Indoor Air Care Advocates we don't surround our advocacy with anything about masks. We're all about the air. So
Mhm.
this is just Michael Bailey talking. But yeah, I
Right.
think masks are a pretty solid addition. But also, if you have that air change rate, then distance actually becomes a factor again. Like when they used to say we should socially distance, they were operating on a model where, the droplets will fly from a person and they'll fall to the ground within 6 feet. But we've learned COVID hangs in the air for up to 3 hours. And so that's not really true. It was a flawed model that was leading to flawed advocacy and policy and public health communication. So now we know if we clean the air like we were supposed to based on these recommendations, then 6 feet may actually make a difference, because that does give a HEPA filter or outdoor air a greater chance of moving that particle away from a person than it would have had.
That's interesting. Why do you think, this is just like a conversational question, and feel free to jump in at any point, Kristian. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? I want to make sure. Okay, cool. All right. So, what was I saying? Oh, yes. So, why do you think that in terms of, just like, I guess, government monies or like research in terms of like wide distribution of HEPA filters in places like, ShopRite, Stop and Shop, like, I don't know. Yes, they're big supermarkets, but if we had like a whole ton of them, right? Put everywhere where the coupon dispensers used to be, like they plant them all over. Why do you think that time wasn't spent or isn't being spent or money even investing in things like that, trying to put them into all over the supermarkets when that could cover the situation where there are people that are like anti-vaccine because they're scared of it or other reasons or other purposes, and people who are also anti-mask and anti-vaccine. And it's like, if there's filters everywhere, that would take care of that issue without having to adjust behaviors. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on like the reason why we haven't quite yet invested that kind of attention into air filters at this time as a country?
I have my suspicions and my thoughts, but none of this is like confirmed, right? So One of the things is anytime that you spend money on risk mitigation, you are acknowledging that like there's a problem. And
Mm.
so to get the funding, now for corporations, right? Like if you're telling people, hey, like you need to come back to work, like it's fine. You need to get back to work. If you also are committing this large portion of money to putting to revamping like HVAC systems, that's a big acknowledgement that, hey, maybe your workplace isn't as safe as like you previously thought it was. And with what I've dealt with in schools, I know these are conversations that we've had. It's okay. Well, no, it's fine. And you can't say anything, but it's fine, because if you say, oh, it's not fine, yes, we do need to revamp these schools. We do need to like dedicate this money that's been allotted for COVID. Then that also means, okay, well, should we start talking about mask mandates? Should we start
You're
talking
saying it's not
about
like people don't want to start conversations.
that's a big portion of it. And another portion is that it's still expensive because not as many people know about it.
Not as many people. Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
I think I would just readopt and reallege what she said.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would echo that. Yeah. The other thing is basically, no, I think that the other way that I was thinking of saying it is practically the exact same thing. Basically, any acknowledgement of the problem is kind of disregarded as hysteria. But the problem is, it doesn't matter what virus is causing you to not show up to work. Like right now, we have 75% of ERs full, and we have classes going virtual. So kids are filling hospitals instead of classrooms. It doesn't matter that it's influenza-like illness, which, by the way, COVID is being kind of hand waved as an influenza-like illness. I understand that COVID may not be the main actor in this drama right now, but my point is it's a little bit hand wavy. But it doesn't really matter what exact airborne virus is doing this. If we had a message in 2020 that was like, yo, there's a lot more need for us to raise the bar for viruses and keep them from transmitting to kids and families, we should have heeded that. And I think that we still have time to make a decision like, oh yeah, I guess it isn't working. We really maybe do need to acknowledge that as a species, we need to behaviorally adapt to increased pressures and challenges in our environment.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So in terms of, I'm just thinking about this there's a certain amount of denial, I think, that's going on, societally and even government wise. There's a certain degree of it, I think, as my opinion. What are ways do you think, because it's a scary topic, right? COVID, nobody wants to talk about COVID these days, I think, and of course we don't know, I don't want to talk about COVID, but it's important to talk about, because when there's a problem and there's no conversation around it, it becomes unhealthy, right? So, it can't be just treated like it doesn't exist. So maybe what are your thoughts on ways conversations around these kinds of topics can be started, especially in situations where there's a certain amount of denial? What are ways people can make each other feel comfortable when we advocate to other people on these topics? And just like, what are some good ways to start those kinds of conversations?
So we had a little bit of this conversation last night, but the one of the things that has really propelled a lot of like the action in my sphere of things has been through school advocacy. In my city, school performance is so just tightly tied to real estate and politics and things like that. And so when schools are underperforming, and you can put people on Front Street about how they're underperforming, and you can say like, hey, like I already, like this isn't I think this is something that I've done, and like these are the numbers for like what's happening. And then when you can also tie somebody's inaction to why the status quo is what it is, you get like eyes on the problem really quickly, and you force conversations because it's people's jobs on the line. And not only in like districts, it also becomes like political jobs. This is incumbents get really nervous because it's like, oh, well, this happened in your district. This is something that you were supposed to be heading up. And now like you have like just normal everyday citizens who are very succinctly making it clear that you aren't doing your job.
So pointing out inaction.
Pointing out the consequences of inaction and connecting the dots. I feel that we've all enjoyed a long duration in which we have been able to put our heads down and focus on our passions, interests, etc. as as people. And there have been problems that have made us raise our heads from our work, like, wow, I don't know if I can deal with what's going on. But on top of those problems, we now also have air quality stopping us from focusing on our work, focusing on our passions, and really having the continuity and stability that we want. So when you see that Alabama, for instance, where I live, has one of the highest infection rates for influenza-like illness, when you see that classes are going virtual, when you see that we're stumbling over our inaction, that's a great time to point out what the consequences are and connect the dots for people like, hey, I may not be an economist or an air quality or public health expert, but I'm listening to those people and they're saying we have crazy inflation. They attribute a lot of that inflation to wage inflation, and they attribute that to the labor shortage. And then I'm reading about how the labor shortage is contributed to by 1 million Americans who aren't here anymore, and also 3 to 4 million Americans who have experienced extensive disability. So, yeah, normally when I advocate, though, I try to keep COVID itself as one of the characters, but not the only one. I mean, we really just have air quality as a problem. It's been a long-standing problem in schools. It's been well published. There's great literature about it. If you read William J. Fisk's The Problem of Ventilation in Schools, I think it's called, it's a great literature review of how ventilation, this is before any pandemic that we were dealing with, ventilation keeps people in school, keeps kids and teachers in school. It increases teacher retention. It increases student test scores and school performance. In businesses, there's literature to support that ventilation reduces the amount of sick days that you have to pay out as a company. That's money. $400 per year, I think, was probably the estimate in one of those articles. And it was for the company, it was a large company. It was something like $1 billion or something. I believe it was a large amount of money, like a lot of money. So yeah, I mean, monetizing those figures is really important. I may be wrong about the billion. I'm trying to think through and figure out what it was, but it was a fair amount of money. The other thing is that schools, when it comes to schools, you can look up their grades. You can look up whether they've really rebounded. There are websites like School Digger and Niche, and there's also in your state, there may be a report card for schools. And if you go look and see what they were at 2019 and what they are now, and say, why haven't we rebounded? Maybe because we haven't hit normalcy. And to get that normalcy, we may need to respond to the stimuli that are kind of around us. Got to do something.
Health and safety first, and that always has to be at the front of schools, at the front of the decisions that they make. So I totally agree about that. Okay, let me see. So looking at the other questions I have for you. Are there certain filters that are more effective than other filters in terms of like, do they have special features? Like, is there, I don't know, a special filter niche? Like, if you pay $3,000 versus a $200 one, what's the big difference, and does it even matter? Or is it just because it looks nice? Like, what are your thoughts on that? It would be good to get a little bit more education on the filter market in general, to have that all in kind of one video to just, yeah, have a bit of a conversation on that.
I have something I could probably screen share. Do you mind if I try that?
Yeah, for sure. I want to see if I'm not sure if I have any. I'm the host. I don't know how that works too well.
Looks like it'll let me.
Okay, yeah, go ahead for sure.
All right. So this is taken from the Center for Green Schools handout for in-room HEPA air cleaners, and it talks about, the whole paper talks about how to specify the right level, which in their paper it's 6 air changes per hour or more. But they also talk about the effectiveness of HEPA filters. There are other filters out there that are not HEPA filters. There are filters that say that they're HEPA-like. There are filters that say that they're like, I'll just make up some names, like HEPA Ninja, HEPA Sweet, Super HEPA, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, those have a filter rating, and it's not HEPA, and that's why they have another word kind of tacked on in a proprietary name, because it's not a HEPA filter. So you have to be careful and shop for a HEPA filter. And if you want to get the risk reductions that are advertised, I guess you could say, in scientific literature, if you accept that you don't know what the risk reduction is that you're gaining with that filter, then you can buy, I suppose, any filter. There are additional things you can, like gewgaws, you can get with filters. My understanding is that, based on my recollection of hearing from experts, I don't think that UV increases the effectiveness significantly for a HEPA filter. The air moves so fast through there that the amount of energy it takes for UV to inactivate a virion is like a certain duration times a certain intensity level. And if it's flying through the filter and then just hits the filter, it's like you're killing something that's already captured. or you didn't have time to kill it while it went through. So my understanding is that UV isn't a differentiator, nor is it necessarily something that would make you not want to buy one. I will say that some filters have other electronic air cleaning technology, and the experts are really careful to kind of partition and be like, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't know about that stuff. We don't know if it's safe or effective. There's just not enough studies in indoor spaces with in or as used conditions that are peer reviewed. There's not enough information to tell us that it's worth using or that it's even particularly safe. And some of those technologies, there are chemists who have done indoor air studies that have found that some of those electronic air cleaning technologies can potentially increase the number of toluenes, aldehydes, and other things, acetone and such in the air. So when I listen to the experts, I come to the conclusion we just should get some HEPA filters and not try to add anything to it. I
No
think,
HEPA ninja.
yeah, I think you ruin a good thing if you add anything to it. It really just needs to be a fan and a filter, and we're done. We just need the fan to move a lot of air through that filter, and then we can have a nice day.
Okay, fan and filter. Yeah, beware the HEPA ninja, everybody. 'Cause that...
I love it.
So, yeah, HEPA. Okay, maybe this would actually, I forgot if I wrote this down as a question or not, but this would be a good time maybe for you and Kristian to talk about ionization and the dangers of it. Because I used to think that it seemed safe because I was like, oh, it's on the box, it looks great, and nobody's complaining about it from what I see. But then, like, I got informed, and you informed me and showed me what's actually going on, and there's some dangers to ionization. So if you can talk a little bit about those kinds of filters and how to avoid them, that would be really excellent.
I feel like you look like you want to speak, Kristian, or do you want me to?
I just have, so when I know that the process that the schools go through to figure out what filters that they're going to use, so there's a indoor air quality plan, and what they say is, oh, well, the CDC says this, and this is what we did, right? And so there is a methodology that you're supposed to use to pick filters, and like industry standards, there is a unbiased testing protocol that goes through all of the filters that are on the market. Well, some of the filters that are on the market. And so what schools are supposed to do is pick from this set of filters. Now, what my district did not do that. So some of our messaging has been, hey, so this is why we say, this is why the CDC has outlined these are the list of choices, because when you don't, Michael is showing it on the screen, but when you don't, you move into an area. I want to be like very careful about how I talk about it, but you move into an area where you have technologies that haven't been proven to be as effective as they say that they're supposed to be. And also, as you said, you run the risk of putting a harmful particulate into the air, which is the exact opposite of what you're supposed to be doing. And so when these are government money, this is government money that you're using. You should probably be using it for what has been like peer reviewed and studied, and not just like, oh yeah, this is the company that offered me a huge discount on this bundle. And that's what we're seeing has happened.
And it does come at a great discount compared to the solutions, but the experts have said there are no shortcuts. There's better filters for your HVAC, there's moving more outdoor air into the space, and then there's portable HEPA filters. On the side, there are things like UV that a lot of people aren't employing, but by and large, I've Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Health, Berkeley Cities and Schools. I could name a long list of authorities in this matter that have just said, hey, just do the other things. Do the things we're recommending. So I also talked to a school administrator today in Washington State who said that they want to be an asthma safe school. They want to be a school that's surely increasing air quality and that they're certain about what they're using. And that's why they didn't employ ionization and they don't employ foggers, which are, again, the Lancet COVID-19 Commission is another example where they've said foggers, ionization are not things that they recommend. And I personally think that this is a subtraction problem. We need to subtract things from the air, and you don't bring a plus sign to a minus sign problem. That's my personal advocacy position.
Sign to a minus sign. Yeah, yeah. So there people can get sick from from ionization, right? You can catch things from that. Is that something that I heard? Is that true?
I'm not sure about that.
Or you can like, I don't know. I thought I heard somebody say something like that where it can affect the health in some negative way. I'm not sure. Okay. So that makes sense. And for, well, there was another question I had in terms of you mentioned something about miniature or portable HEPA filters. What kind of air changes do those have, and what are the price ranges of those?
Oh, well, for example, actually, since we're looking at my browser,
Yeah.
I can just go HEPA. They vary, but this is an example spreadsheet. There's a much better one by Clean Air Stars, which is an Australian group. But yeah, I mean, you can pay, let's see, I have the dollars per square foot here, so I don't have the actual price of the unit, but you can pay anything from $100 or $80 even on up to, in the case of the ones that I use at home, they're $200 filters, which is a fat amount of privilege to put that kind of stuff in your home. Although the size of our home is also so we needed the big filters if we're going to have people come into the home and share air with us. But the number of square feet you can get covered, there's a group called the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. They rate these and make sure that they actually conform to a certain degree of air cleaning. And so they can tell you in cubic feet per minute what the clean air delivery rate is. And so this one here, the HPA, Honeywell HPA 020B, if I correctly recorded it from the AHAM verified site, it was 60 cubic feet per minute. And then it goes on up to this HPA 5300B gets 323 cubic feet per minute.
And what's
So
the
if you,
price of that one? Oh,
let's see,
200, and that's a portable one.
let's look that up. $100, $289, depends, I guess, on which site you go to. I can't imagine it would be down. Oh, it might be the one that was on sale for cut rate prices, but
And
I
you
think 300 is more likely.
Yeah, and it's a good point to make for the audience that these can be bought at Best Buy, Walmart, Target, anywhere you find filters. HEPA filters are very accessible. Many people probably haven't even thought about, purchasing one of them, but whoever's watching, like this, they're very easy to order. So these are considered the portable ones or not?
Yeah, portable doesn't mean you carry it around like a suitcase
Yeah,
or
no.
even like a handheld. There are kind of ultra portable ones that people have used on airplanes. And again, I'm not an expert, but what I've read from experts kind of like talking about it is there's not a lot of established information to suggest that those are useful because it's just cleaning a little amount of air. And then you've got all the air flowing and rushing in from around you. It's just like the way that air mixes, my understanding is that it's not been ascertained whether those really do anything for you. Not that I might not try it, but I don't know that they're effective. I think that what might be effective is having enough filtration for the room, and you can't achieve that with a ultra portable that you're carrying, say, into an enclosed space, because you really need something that can move more air, I think.
Makes sense. It
Just
would be
guessing.
so nice if there was like eventually a mask filter HEPA combination for the future where it was like
There is actually.
there is?
There is. So I don't know if it's NIOSH approved. The way that again, everything I do is like, did an expert say it was cool?
Yeah.
Is it approved?
Oh,
Did
yeah,
the
of course.
authorities look at it? So I don't know it to be NIOSH approved, but I know there to be a portable, it's a PAPR, portable air purifying respirator, which attaches to a mask and then has a tube to a small rechargeable, a very portable HEPA filter. It was designed for, I think, for like people who might do a lot of like athletics and running and stuff in China where there might have been poor air quality. I think that was the story that somebody told me. And it was just to get clean air into your lungs, without getting a lot of smoke. It was just meant to filter, pollutants and particulates. But as it turns out, HEPA filters have been studied and found to do a great job with virus particles too. So
That's very interesting. So what is the name of that? But I know Daniel has some questions, but I'm just kind of curious, like what's the name of that? What's
in
the name?
another browser, I might be able to go find it.
Yeah, that would be
I could
great.
follow up on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
'cause that's interesting.
Especially if you've got a question for Kristian, then I'd go search for it while she fills the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. Daniel has some questions, so he can go ahead with that.
Right. So I had some questions just because we have a lot of students who are focused on design and healthcare, but not like as much medical design, but design in terms of like on the more public health level, what like our policy designs, what are or even infrastructural designs that can be, improved on. So I guess my first question is, I don't know how relevant it is to y'all at this stage, but I was wondering, do you, in your advocacy work, do you advocate for any policies for infrastructural design changes for the construction of new schools, for example, or in the renovations of existing schools to implement not just these portable plug-in filters, but on like and like the ventilation system overall um to be more effective, I guess, because I guess one of the things that I heard mentioned earlier was that a lot of these HEPA filters are very loud and they're like windy and can interfere with instruction. So I was wondering if y'all have delved into that side at all.
So one of the things that sorry about that.
No worries.
One of the things that I learned about as a result of Michael's guide that he gives to parents, but then linked back to one of our earlier problems with advocacy, was looking at what Baltimore City is doing in its schools in comparison to what other cities are doing in their schools. And so from the very beginning, I knew that, okay, well, I just want to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And so what I did was I looked at their published IAQ plan, which is on the district website. And they have a spreadsheet, and I was like, oh, great, here's some good numbers. And it's not really that. It's literally, okay, well, these are the schools that have already gotten federal and state monies, and we've already revamped their HVAC systems. And then these are the schools that do not. And so you just got to like look on this spreadsheet and find out if your school had already had the big HVAC revamp, or if you were just going to get portable filters. And so my school was on the list that just got portable filters. And so, but one of the issues that we're running into now, and one of the things that I want to eventually bring to center stage, is how they implemented the schools, how they picked the schools that are going to get those HVAC revamps, has strong correlation to the schools that are in areas with like a lot of like white kids, with a lot of higher income families. And so it becomes like an equity thing, right? I immediately knew, okay, well, if you are giving us these HEPA filters because our school is so old and there's no money for HVAC revamps, are you doing like due diligence and making sure that they even fit the space? So that's how this all got started. And that's how I started to learn about the HEPA filters in the beginning, because I had no idea, but that's been like a big thing. Eventually, what I want to be able to do is establish, and I was saying that it's hard because we don't have. I'm all about like numbers, and so I'll say, hey, so like, what are the COVID numbers for this school? What happened week by week for COVID infections? And people are like, oh yeah, I'm like, well, you wrote it down, right? There's a space, and they're like, no. So for one thing, there's no continuity across schools for how they were recording cases. So what we figured out is some schools have emails where they sent out like notifications for an infection on campus. And so we're having to like go through and like create a database for COVID infections. And what I eventually want to be able to do is link infections in schools that have not had the upgraded HVAC systems, and eventually even after this year, because for the schools that have had the upgraded HVAC systems, what they did do was they upgraded the filters inside of them to MERV 13 filters. And so even that, like, I want to establish, because I know it's there, it's a historical thing. This is how like status quo is in Baltimore City. I want to establish that, okay, well, so we have all of these COVID infections in this school. These are the schools where health disparities, there's already a pattern with health disparities in Black and Brown communities, lower income schools. And also, you knew this, and you still put HEPA filter rollout that you didn't do due diligence with. And so acknowledging the problem and putting like exact numbers to the problem is the beginning of starting to push for, okay, so you can't pretend that you don't know like what the situation is. You have to do this now.
That is a very interesting answer. And it's just kind of astounding to me, because for me, like just listening to everything you've talked about so far, it's like, obviously we're all on the same page now that like it's a no-brainer to like improve the air quality in schools. But it's shocking to me that there are no policies around it or no set budgets for it, it seems, at least in the Baltimore City, and that you're put in a position where you have to be so self-direct and self-initiated and gathering the data that should have been gathered in the first place. So that's like extremely interesting for me to hear, because I thought there'd be at least some kind of top-down level, but it's really just like a grassroots sort of effort?
Yeah, I just ran some of the numbers quickly because I was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, this is what their plan is. When you compare Boston Public Schools indoor air quality plan and then Baltimore City's indoor air quality plan, well, currently the school budget for Boston Public Schools is $1.3 billion, right? And Baltimore City's is $1.6 billion. And you're like, oh, okay, well, it should be fine. But we can talk about all the reasons why. It's like underserved communities and misappropriated funds and shadow money and corruption, all of this stuff that explains like why, if you have more money, like this should be solved. But that's why I'm really pushing for these issues to be solved intracommunally, because like the problems are systemic. And so we've already established that this isn't going to be anything. It is going to be a hard, long battle to get anything done at the upper levels of like even to like the district. This is very much like communication with school principals and communication with teachers and funding for like filters and stuff for the classrooms and funding for monitors in the classrooms from parents' pockets. Baltimore City, and I went to Baltimore City Public Schools, but Baltimore City has had to give parents have donated fans. Like they've donated air conditioners, they donated heaters, because if you don't, the HVAC systems and the heating systems are so old that school is out for days at a time. So if that's for existing infrastructure, there I knew that with HEPA filters, it's definitely going to be, like I said, if you have to donate fans, we're probably going to have to donate HEPA filters as well.
What infuriates me is that the American taxpayer, which is all of us, have put together money and given it to schools for that problem. But nobody, I think, thought about prioritizing, or not, there wasn't a top-down or systematic way in which it was communicated that we should prioritize the source of the learning loss so that we don't continue to stumble over it. Rather, they've prioritized learning loss itself that you can attribute to a few months of, virtual school. And yet here we continue to have increased illness and absences in our school areas. There's like a school in Marshall County, Alabama, which is near me-ish. And they stopped school like a little while back until the 14th. It's just like, I don't know. Or, in November, early November. It was beginning of November. I mean, it blows my mind that we're okay with stumbling over this when we have been given this mountain of cash that we should have vaporized into ventilation and HEPA filtration instead. I think that a lot of it has gone to the learning loss that took place then, but there was no foresight like, oh, this could cause further learning loss if it actually does what you're expecting it to do. So that's been rough on me to imagine the taxpayer coughing up more money personally from our pockets in an unequal and I guess I should say like a disuniform way. We're all going to come up with different amounts of money, and some of us are going to have enough money to get one school to do it, but maybe not that other school. It's just like mind-blowing to me.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as a follow-up question to that, is I was wondering if you knew of any states or any other counties or districts that do have building codes specifically for HVAC for schools, because I know that in hospitals, at least that's like where my experience is, that there are like very stringent codes that like HVAC has to reach this certain levels, which makes sense because it's in a hospital setting. But I would imagine that there would be some kind of similar building code for schools. Do you know of any existing examples of that?
Yeah, I would say that some of our advocates are, friends basically in other states have found that the building codes for schools might be the best recourse for us to advocate through government to make sure that these recommendations are at least partially taken up. Because to the extent that they're not hitting the requirements, you can get them to inch toward the recommendations. And during that work, they may have an opportunity to upgrade systems to even meet recommendations, which would be ideal.
Gotcha.
But it
yeah.
depends on the school. It could be the State Department of Education, could be for institutes of higher education, it could be a different authority that sets that forth. And it would be a different research mission per institution that you want to advocate in.
Gotcha. And I guess this kind of segues very well into like my next question that I already had planned. So I guess in terms of designing your movement, designing your organization's efforts, and designing your advocacy, how did you approach that? How did you grow how did you like design the growth of the organization and the movement, and also picking out like what to target, who to advocate to, and just like the structure overall?
I'll speak and then I'll ask if it's okay if Kristen can speak because I really like what she's been doing and the kind of model at the school level. But I'll say we just knew that it wouldn't be a unique problem that an Alabama school would maybe not be following the recommendations. And we knew that if it's a problem for us and it's a problem for everybody else, it's not going to become everybody's problem until we all recognize that everybody's having this problem. So our theory of our concept of operations here is make it so that all the parents know that it's not just their problem and unite parents in advocating for these well-established recommendations. And that's how I met Kristian, who's doing excellent advocacy. Every school is different. Every parent is different. You know, we're all just people trying to live our lives, right? But what Kristian's done has been really outstanding. And I'd love for you to be able to talk about that, Kristian.
Yeah, so first, it's been like I have like a million and one like different like pieces to like what I'm doing now and then what I'm hoping that like the end portion of it is. But the how we approached it at first was can we get into the building, because there is such a culture of like, so last year when I wanted to figure out information about what was happening when to preempt this, my child is homeschooled now, and I pulled them specifically because of the Omicron surge. But it was because like it was like pulling teeth trying to get answers about what is happening in the school. And so I remember one PTA, I had like all these questions about testing, and the response to my question was, "Well, we don't have epidemiology degrees." So I was like, okay, me neither. I'm just like trying to figure out like what's going on. And so from there, it became a thing of, okay, well, if you're not going to tell me what the plan already is, and if you, there's just this defensiveness of, well, it's not, well, we're following what the district says, and the district is saying, oh, well, we're following what the state says, and the state's like, oh, well, the CDC said, the health department. So it's like, okay, well, nobody wants to say this is what we're doing. I'll do it. We'll do it live, basically. And so I said, okay, can I get into the school? I'm asking you, but technically you can't tell me no because like it's a government, but like I can come in after kids are there. And so what we did was we went in, we took the measurements for every room in the building, and then I created a spreadsheet. That's why I said it's literally just me being able to solve for X. I don't know a lot about like HEPA technology. I just knew, okay, well, I've read on this in the little source documents that the CDC links back to, that they are saying that 6 to 12 air changes per hour is the target. And so from there, I can solve for the CATR that Michael was talking about before. And from there, I can match whatever HEPA filter that they've put in our classrooms. I can match that to what technically should be, theoretically should be in this space. And so we did that. Everybody was very cagey at the beginning. It was, oh, I have to see if that's okay. And so once we got in though, and we have had to say so many times, like, hey, we are trying to help. I have no ulterior motive. Like somebody said, well, who are you, early on, they said, who are you affiliated with? I'm like, I Google, like I'm not affiliated with anyone. And so, and so we laughed about this once I met Michael, because I was like, oh, here it is. They're going to be like, we told it, we knew it, we called it. This is like this group. And it's like, no, I literally just met him. Like, I promise you that I'm just incredibly passionate about making sure that like we aren't unnecessarily subjecting kids to a mass disabling event. Like that by itself should be enough motivation. And so now what I'm trying to do is counter. I mentioned it in a message a few hours ago that like my point now is to try to counter indoctrinate kids, because I know that the ICA, you all don't have a position on masking, but we really want masks, high quality masks on faces in the building. And so when we speak to the principal, hey, well, can you say we want masks on faces? She's like, no, because we want that every parent and every family that sends their child into the school is able to make their own decisions. Fine. What I can do though is I can talk to kids and I can create a community of care for your schoolmates with children. So another thing that we're working on is literal like slideshows for every grade that we plan to show, pick a day in science class and show it to kids, because where there's a lot of just politics involved in the decisions for masking. Once we are able to teach kids, hey, like you're just keeping your friends safe. This is why we mask, and there are masks available in the school building. And also, like, there's already this culture that exists that says that, well, what happens in the school is a little different from what happens at home. And this is why it is okay to wear a mask at school. You don't even have to send your kid with one. We will provide them with one. But we want to create a culture where like it's second nature for them to enter the building, put on a mask. We are also trying to get information out to parents. And so one of the things that I've been really particular about and trying to be mindful about is accessible language when we're talking about these things. So even like when you look at this space, I would think that it is really important to think about like who is engaging in these conversations, but also like being very intentional about who is not, who is absent from the conversation. And so when we talk about like carbon monitors, and when we talk about these 200, like we just bought HEPA filters for our house, but when like the people who are able to purchase a $200 filter, a HEPA filter, and a $200 AirNet monitor, like these are also people that typically have access to the technical side of this information. And so who then doesn't, right? And when we know that disabled people and Black and brown communities and lower income folks have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic and also by the fallout of the pandemic, again, that's an equity issue, right? Because if you don't have the information and you are also like less likely to have PTO to be able to take off, it just compounds these issues. So the next thing that we want to be able to do is create information and create a source of information that is very, very easy to understand. Like you don't need to go and like cross-reference a bunch of studies that the CDC posted, because like people do not, that is a privilege to be able to have access to that. A computer, a phone that is able to access those sites is an immense privilege. And so working from a very like grassroots level, I've also been offering myself as a resource. Hey, like you don't have to find anything for yourself. You can literally call me. Like this is my cell phone number. This is my email address. It doesn't even have to be you. Like if your auntie wants to know, tell her to call me. And so just really digging deep into care and compassion and like collectivist values for disseminating information, I think is the way forward, because eventually to end the pandemic, like it has to be ended for all. Folks that have like some padding from a lot of the effects of the pandemic, eventually like you're going to be affected. Like we have people complaining about their access to healthcare and their access to, and this is for, I guess, middle upper class folks, but eventually like we are all in this together. You're going to be affected, if not because of sheer numbers and how transmissible the variants are becoming. What happens when there just aren't, you're 1 in 95 in a grocery store of a ton of people is not going to protect you. But if people don't know to wear N95s, if N95s are like a fifth of people's grocery budget, like what can you do? So I'm really, really interested in making sure that these things are accessible for all of us so that the pandemic is over for all of us, versus like being really bad for some people and just kind of annoying for others. So that's my soapbox.
And that N95 thing reminded me, I want to address one possible erratum, which might be, I think that N95 masks are capable of getting 95% of highly penetrative particles. I think N100 masks are capable of getting 99.97%. Just, I would have to look it up to be sure, but I just wanted to throw that out there. That might not be N95s may not get 99%, I don't think. I think N100s can get closer to that, I think. But again, not an expert. I'd have to look it up to be sure. I also wanted to share, I think that the CDC has had various different air change rates. And a person named, I think it's Devabhaktuni Sri Krishna, I think he's looked into what they are, and it's like 5 here. Here they may say 6, and then there's somewhere else where I think he may have inventoried them saying 7. So I don't know that they've had one uniform air change rate at CDC. The CDC recommendation I know about that is the only one that I ever really cite is that they say you should have less than 800 parts per million in a classroom as a benchmark of decent ventilation. So yeah, just getting some numbers that I think I remember. I certainly remember the 800 though.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And also thank you, Christian, for that narrative that you described, because that's, I think there's like so many messages and so many takeaways from like how your experiences in terms of community awareness and like campaign and information dissemination, because these are kind of things that our organization works on too. And a problem that we've had is that like us as students, like we are in a position of privilege and we have access to technologies, and we have the time, most importantly, to actually disseminate the information. But that being said, because of all these things, because we are able to work on a communication awareness campaign, we are very much then like separated from the people we're actually trying to reach. So I like wanted to like highlight it or like reflect on a couple of things that you mentioned. Is that one, like in the schools, you're also creating a culture of change like in the kids, because I feel like for a lot of school focused campaigns, people automatically go straight to the parents, but not realizing the fact that like, yes, even the kids or the parents are okay and tell their kids to wear a mask in the school, like it's at the end of the day, it's a bunch of kids with like a lot of peer pressure and like a lot of like feelings of needing to like fit the norm and do what everyone else is doing. So that's really, really cool that you're like actually targeting the kids and the culture there. And also on the other hand, the fact that you know, like you just like put your phone number out there, because that honestly might be the best way to like reach people, instead of, you know, putting like a poster with a QR code, which I think a lot of people are doing now, including us for One American. It's just like not going to be that effective. It's a QR code. There's nothing like personal about that this information dissemination. So I think we're probably gonna like model a lot of our own efforts on what we're doing after that too.
And another thing that I want to make sure, because I feel like when we talk about underserved communities, it kind of gets, so I'm upset with myself that I didn't mention it. But the other thing is when you're creating materials that are being disseminated to people, also, so everything that I know has literally been something like the seed was planted by disability Twitter or disability activists, right? And so one of the things that, and if anything, my goal has been to make like my school and the grocery store and just these like a very important community, like you have to be able to eat. And there are people who it is literally not safe for them to go into these spaces. And so like, and that's just not okay. And it shouldn't be okay. If it's not okay for one of us, it shouldn't be okay for any of us, right? And so the other thing is creating materials that use like accessibility aids. So like, are we creating like graphics that also have alt text? Like there are a million and one different things that like get treated as an afterthought that really should be like the first thing that we're doing, because so much of our policy making and so many of the things, like the reason that we know gold standard for HEPA filters and for carbon monitors and those things is because it's the people whose lives literally depend on it who are vetting these things, because they typically are the afterthought, and also like don't have like in a systemic way are not hooked up to any like lifelines to create safety for them, to create safety for their like physical bodies and to literally save their lives. And so they're really, but disability activists have been indispensable in all of my understanding of what is happening right now and how to protect my family. So that's the other thing, making sure that like the things that we create to educate people are accessible for people of all abilities and for disabled folks.
Absolutely. I'm gonna have to do a lot of Googling on my own and just see examples of material that are like that just consider this whole like holistic image of like the population we were trying to reach out to and address all the different needs for accessibility.
the advocacy by students with disabilities on the part of Pan Endit, it's a group of students in, I think, Arizona and all over the place, has really been helpful for me. I found out that the U.S. Department of Education wanted to increase the protections and support available to students with disabilities through Section 504. So one thing you can do to kind of join that throng is go send a comment to you have to go and find this page and go find the information. But if you look up Pan Endit has a writing campaign, a letter writing campaign with example letters and so on. In fact, I can probably dig that up as an afternote to accompany the recording here, but their advocacy has been supreme. There's also, I'm trying to back up here, but I'm failing. There's also this, the EPA is asking, what can we do as a government to support better indoor air quality to address the transmission of illness in buildings? So there's a formal comment period ending on the 5th of December. And the things that people could advocate for are that we people who inhabit these buildings, who occupy these buildings, we be given transparent, quantifiable information about ventilation and filtration, and that it conform or at least overlap with the recommendations that exist. We want maybe for the government to also issue a uniform recommendation. We want apples to apples information about ventilation so everybody speaks the same language, and so that we can all compare and look at the risk level of a particular building. You know, I know that what we're experiencing right now might not be the same thing we're experiencing in terms of like viral illness in the future. So, you know, what if something that does get people's attention comes around? Wouldn't it be nice to be prepared and have things kind of on an even keel? So that's another place we can advocate. Then you also can check into the ESSER funds that have been spent in secondary and I think it's basically K-12 schools. And then there are other funds that universities have gotten, and some of them have given that as a stipend to students, I think. I think you can look into what they've done with that money by inquiring maybe with, gosh, it may depend on the university, but there may still be some of that money that you can advocate for being spent on appropriate levels of HEPA filtration in classrooms, labs, etc.
Excellent. Super interesting. And yeah, just to wrap this up, I think I have a mini question, and then I just have like a general question to finish things up to kind of address the rest of the what we were going to talk about. So in terms of how long does it take? So I just want to get this one point clear for say for instance, if you have like 10 air changes or something like that happen in 15 air changes, you have enough HEPA filters to do that, and it kills like maybe 90% or 95% of, say, COVID in the air or whatever. Would that take like an hour to do that, or would it be faster, or like what's the speed of getting rid of that percentage?
There's a graph. Basically, it's an inverse relationship, and the number of air changes increases the aggressiveness of the graph going towards zero. And by the way, 6 to 12 air changes, another part of the basis of that appears to me to be that the experts have reasoned that that's a reasonable amount that's achievable, like 6 being the lower end is a reasonably attainable amount within, you know, the budget and the noise constraints and so on and so forth. Not that I wouldn't like that it'd be more. But yeah, I think that I'd have to look at a graph, and then we could look at how many minutes it takes to get to 99% reduction.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's something to definitely, yeah, that sounds cool. So in terms of where we are at as a country in terms of air filter awareness, like where are we at, and how can we advocate? This is like kind of the final general thing I'd love to address, is how can we advocate that the government takes a stronger stand for air filters?
So I think the EPA is giving us a great opportunity right now with this request for information. So that's one great place where we can advocate. One of the things that we're assembling, we have kind of a long list of things that we want to ask for, but one of them is that science grants be granted to better figure out the dimensions of risk reduction that occur at different air change rates or different airflow per person, so that we can better quantify and understand, you know, what risk reductions are available in a particular space, but also that they echo the same recommendations out as the experts are putting forth, so that there's a uniform and consistent understanding of what we all should be able to expect. Right now, it's a bit of a secret to me. it's, you have to be attentive, and like Kristian and myself and you, by looking into this, you have to be kind of digging for it, and then eventually you amass a collection of like, wow, there's a lot of recommendations, and they're all kind of overlapping with like more outdoor air and more HEPA filtration, one or the other or both. And so, yeah, if the government made those recommendations, that may help. Yeah, that's what I can think of offhand.
So to have like a space, just a space where the information can be just one space, people can just have the recommendations and everything and just have that as their spot to go to. That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, if you have anything you want to say, Kristian, before we wrap up about that topic, feel free. Awesome.
I was just going to say that I think that it's growing, but it's really slow, slow going awareness. And I kept a few notes about it, but I was trying to figure out like when the big jump in like conversations about air purifiers and like clean air started. And there have been conversations that already existed that were centered around like smoke from wildfires and general pollution. So there's already, it's a sector. But now I know that it's growing specifically because of COVID. And so people are already like making their projections about sector growth over the next few years. I think that it's going to take up capitalism, right? It's going to take off once companies start to realize that there are ways to market to consumers, even in getting people to come indoors. Hey, like I wish that I could remember where it was, but somebody was posting their carbon monitor results, and it was like, yeah, these are the targets that we're hitting, like this is a clean space. And I think that when people realize that can be commodified, that will will push it. And then also unionizing has become a really, like, it's taking off, it's exciting. And I think that as we start to gain more data about, like, as we start to be able to quantify air quality, and as that starts to become just more of a, not household thing, but just more readily available information, I think that people are going to be able to take it and apply like the legal side to it and say, hey, like this has been it's a workplace safety issue. And so when you start to push court cases about it, I think that'll also it'll take off then as well.
Excellent. Awesome. So to just recap a few of the things that we said is, Corsi Rosenthal, DIY HEPA filters are cheap to make, $30, maybe $40, I don't know, but that's something that not many people know about, but that can be a thing. How many air changes per hour? 10
Maybe
to 15.
maybe more like 40 to 60 bucks, I think.
Okay, 40
Sorry.
to 60.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. It's better than 200 though, so.
Yes. Yep.
And they're just as effective pretty much. And then also in terms of air changes per hour, the effective amount is like 10 to 15, like really effective. And that is
6 to 12 is what's recommended.
6 to 12.
I haven't seen a recommendation for 15. I wouldn't object as long as it wasn't too drafty.
Okay, so up to 15, I'll just put down. And yeah, the more, so to get that 6 to 12, the recommended amount could be 2 to 3 in a room, in a space. That can be something that can work really well. So it just doesn't.
Oh, let me clarify. I don't originate any recommendations. I just advocate for 2 to 3 because I want there to be a more uniform risk reduction in the room. So no, I don't know that there's any recommendation per se. I actually might be able to find one for multiple of them, but not a specific number.
Well, we recommend it, and that's what matters. That's it. And so, yeah, better than 5 air changes in my opinion. So, yeah, and basically we just need to address, making this information accessible and making sure that schools have a lot more equality in terms of how the air filter situation is handled there and the air quality and etc. There needs to be a lot more equality over there. Everywhere there's common issues in classrooms that we need to be aware of. And yeah, and one of the takeaways of this too is that, just HEPA filters, part of the big COVID equation, and any pathogen of course, but COVID equation, just like vaccines and masks, we need to start talking about air filters. So yeah, and stay away from ionization and HEPA ninja. Those are other takeaways.
Avoid the HEPA ninja, and yeah, the experts that I'm acquainted with haven't recommended ionization, I'll say.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Awesome. And unless anybody has any last words or anything you would like to say, I think this concludes our panel.
If I could just end it with the words of an advocate who I also admire, in addition to Kristian, Stacy from Panendit said, you can't learn to live without the learning part. So that's what we're doing.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you so much, Kristian, for your incredible research and work. You're doing amazing work, as well as you, Michael. You're doing incredible work. And thank you so much for talking with us at Design by Health. And thank you, Daniel, co-founder of Design by Health. Thank you for being part of the conversation as well. Awesome. All right. I shall now stop the recording.
Thank you.